Before I start, I'm going to say, while the clip I'm going to show soon in the video is extremely slowed down, please be cautious if you suffer with epilepsy or any condition where lights may cause seizures. While epileptic myself and it doesn't affect me, I can't guarantee it won't for everyone. In December of 1997, Pokémon accidentally became the centre of one of the biggest media controversies in anime history. The episode was called Electric Soldier Porygon, and for most people watching it was supposed to just be another episode of a children's cartoon. During one sequence around 20 minutes into the episode, rapid flashing red and blue lights filled the screen for several seconds, and this was after Pikachu used Thunderbolt on some attacking missiles. Almost immediately reports began flooding in from Japan of children experiencing seizures. Hundreds were hospitalised, but hysteria raised the numbers up to around 12,000. However, as mentioned, a large amount of these numbers may be due to playground hysteria with Japanese children. Television networks wanted a headline story, and this was a perfect excuse. And overnight, one of the biggest entertainment franchises was a public safety concern. The Pokémon anime was temporarily pulled from broadcast and re-evaluated on the TV show's future. The episode is banned from official broadcasting and distribution, but it isn't lost media. Its availability online is due to it being leaked, archived by fans and hosted on unauthorised platforms rather than official streaming services. And even today it's remembered as a concern that happened during a TV show meant for children. But unlike most internet horror stories like what I'll talk about soon, this one was real. Which is important when talking about today's subject, the impact of Lavender Town and the creepypastas or internet horror stories surrounding it. Because in the early 2010s, when stories began spreading online about the Pokémon Town's music causing headaches, anxiety and even suicide among children, people were strangely willing to believe it. Part of this could be put down to the Electric Soldier Porygon incident being remembered, or maybe it just worked as some sort of scapegoat, a location already surrounded by death, ghosts, and some of the most unsettling music ever put into a Game Boy game. In the world of Pokémon Red and Blue, very few locations feel as uncomfortable as Lavender Town. Like most areas stuck by Game Boy limitations, it isn't dramatic or visually concerning. There is no extreme fights, no sense of adventure waiting just around the corner. Instead it's quiet, almost weirdly so. A small settlement built around grief where the central landmark isn't a gym or a shop, but a tower filled with the dead where people go to pay their respects to their Pokémon that have passed. Even for a Game Boy game, Lavender Town stands apart. The colour palette leans into muted purples and greys, giving everything an exhausted and washed out look. NPC dialogue isn't focused on battling or collecting Pokémon, but on personal loss. People talk about the Pokémon that didn't survive, and at the centre of it all is the Pokémon Tower, a place players are forced to navigate early in the game where wild ghost-type Pokémon appear, long before most players are prepared for them. And this town's look is as worrying as its music. The music is simple, once again limited by the hardware of the Game Boy, yet deliberately strange, dissonant in a way that feels uncomfortable. High-pitched tones repeat in a looping structure that never settles down, creating a sense of tension that sits just below awareness. It doesn't feel like traditional horror music, it feels wrong in a more subtle way, like something slightly out of tune with the sound you expect it to make. For a lot of players, especially younger ones, this could have created a kind of emotional distress. Pokémon up until that point had been bright and reassuring, battles were playful, towns were welcoming, even moments of challenge still felt contained within a safe structure. Lavender Town almost broke that pattern completely. It introduced death into a world that previously avoided it, almost like it was illegal. Years later, as the internet began to build its own mythology around games such as creepypastas like Ben Drowned, Lavender Town became a perfect candidate for this concern. Early creepypasta culture thrived on taking emotional impressions and turning them into narrative explanations. Creepypasta.com began circulating claims that the original music from Lavender Town was far worse than people thought. This is where the idea of Lavender Town Syndrome began to form. The story evolved. At first it was simply described as children feeling uneasy or getting headaches while playing the game, then it escalated into claims. Eventually more dramatic versions appeared online, suggesting that the music contained hidden frequencies that only children could hear, leading to psychological damage or even suicide. None of this was real, of course. There were no reports, no evidence, no medical documentation, but the story spread anyway because it didn't need for young fans to potentially believe it. The legend stuck more than anyone expected. What made Lavender Town especially powerful as a creepypasta subject wasn't its tone, but its timing. It arrived at a point in internet culture where nostalgia and fear were beginning to intertwine. Lavender Town had become something larger than itself, not because of what was actually in the game, but because of everything people felt it could have meant. By the time Lavender Town had already been reimagined across early internet forums, A new kind of Pokemon horror began to take shape. It moved into something more direct, the idea that an entire game could exist in a corrupted alternate state. That's where Pokemon Creepy Black enters the mythos. Much like earlier stories surrounding Pokemon Red and Blue and the haunted reputation of Lavender Town, Creepy Black is built on a simple premise. A player somehow obtains a mysterious unofficial version of the game, and at first glance it appears normal, basically just Pokemon Red, but almost immediately something feels off. In most versions of the story you could use the move Curse and it would make a trainer disappear with a tombstone left in their place looking exactly like the ones in Lavender Town. It is a strange detail, but one that changes everything about how the story feels. As the game continues, Creepy Black begins to behave less like a structured RPG and more like something unstable. Trainer battles become increasingly distorted, dialogue also breaks down. None of this feels right for the capabilities of the Game Boy. Like many Pokemon creepypastas of its era, Creepy Black does not originate from any official release, developer interview, or hidden build of the game. It was constructed entirely within online communities spreading rumours about lost and found versions of the game. But for some reason, Creepy Black was particularly effective as a myth. Now don't get me wrong, older Pokemon games did have glitches, save files could corrupt, and things like the missing no glitch did not help. These documented imperfections provided just enough credibility to feel possible, even if ridiculously stupid. In that sense, Creepy Black is less about a haunted cartridge and more about the evolution of internet horror itself. It reflects a period where players were no longer just experiencing games, but reinterpreting them, and this connects back to the potential horror of Lavender Town. By the time this sort of Pokemon creepypasta culture had fully taken shape, it developed a very specific habit, taking small, unexplained gaps in older games and turning them into emotional narratives. Very few examples demonstrate that better than the story surrounding Gary's Raticate. On the surface, it's based on something very simple. In the original games, you battle your rival, often referred to as Gary, multiple times throughout the journey. His team changes, evolves, and grows stronger as the player progresses. But at one point in the story, Gary has a Raticate, and in the next encounter, it's gone. No explanation is given, Gary does not address it, it simply disappears from his party like a ghost. For most players, this was nothing more than a standard piece of game progression. Teams change all the time in Pokemon. Pokemon evolve, get swapped out, or replaced with stronger options. I mean, think about how many times you swap Pokemon in each playthrough. But within internet horror communities, especially during the rise of Pokemon creepypasta storytelling, that absence of Raticate was enough to concern people. The version of the story suggests that Gary's Raticate didn't simply get removed for gameplay reasons, but instead died. The theory goes that the player kills your rival's Raticate in a battle on the SS Ant, and Gary, unable to get to a Poké Center on the ship, had to let his Raticate pass away. The implication, of course, is not stated anywhere in the actual game. It comes entirely from the player's own ideas of why the Pokemon isn't there. Gary's brief, emotionally neutral dialogue in the Pokemon Tower is left to interpret however you choose to. It also fits perfectly into the spectrum of ideas that had already formed around Pokemon by this point. What made all these Lavender Town conspiracies stick with the internet isn't that any of them were ever real, it's that they were built from something that was real, the way older games left space theories and ideas instead of using cutscenes to explain every small detail. In Pokemon Red and Blue, especially around places like Lavender Town, these so-called gaps were just part of the hardware at the time, but online those same gaps became something else entirely, pretty much a reason to panic. Because the internet doesn't like unanswered questions. If something feels slightly off, it will eventually be given a conspiracy, whether it deserves one or not, and Pokemon, especially early Pokemon, was full of those strange moments. And that's why these creepypastas survived long after they were debunked. As internet horror evolved, so did Pokemon's myth cycle, even some being put there deliberately. The best DS generation example is the so-called ghost girl that appears in later generations, a brief encounter on a bridge that led to theories and ideas, except it was more deliberately placed this time. It spreads like wildfire in both an unexpected and interesting way. What gaming creepypastas really represent isn't a series of basic horror stories, it's a moment in modern internet culture where players stopped just playing games and started reimagining them for what they may stand for. And that's why these stories make a reappearance every few years into every generation, from mine who grew up in the 2010s with it, to many that will come after, because once a game becomes part of a childhood memory, you'll always want to know more about it, and it will always stick within your memory. Thank you so much for watching. It was definitely strange but cool to go down this trip of memory lane, re-looking at these old internet horror stories. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'm truly appreciative of the people who keep watching and helping this channel grow. I will see you in the next video, and yeah,